foundations of dresses are the most important part of historical dress. Without them, the outer fashion garments would look atrocious. With the corset, petticoat, hip pad, and bust bodice now complete, it was time to work on the outer garments. The first place that I went to was my trusty Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion 2. I found this amazing dress, and it had a perfect skirt dated to circa 1902 to 1903. The pattern was actually closest to the measurements that I needed, and it was modified at the hem to get the pointed look of the fashion plate. The skirt was actually two skirts in one, an underskirt with a circular flounce, and an overskirt just long enough to show the flounce, but not the cotton that was the main part of the underskirt. I went on to making that underskirt first. This was made exactly like the petticoat as they were the same pattern, but the flounce was longer, so the points of the overskirt covered the cotton that was the main part and only showed the flounce at the hem, if that makes any sense. After that, the overskirt was made and the hem was hand done. I didn't have any examples that a hem was done this way, putting the lining and the hem together and hand working it, but I went onto Blair's book and found that hems that were faced would have been done the same way with a slip stitch, so that's what I did to finish it off. This turned out fantastic in the end. Now let's take a look at how the rest of the making process went.
Today we're gonna just pass the time by finishing this underskirt because it shouldn't take me too long. After reading up more on sewing techniques, but also looking at extant garments, I don't know if I've said this previously, but if I have, well, I'll just say it again. Sarah Nicole is a worker who works at the Symington museum with extant garments and mostly corsets in their collection. And the corset pattern that I used is from that collection that somebody on Etsy, Nikki, was able to pattern off, but that's beside the point. They have a really nice 1905 blue chiffon gown that was made around the same time that I'm doing my project, and I've been using that heavily as reference for how things were finished off and how things were sewn. So from what Sarah Nicole has sent me and from what she has said doing research on the garment herself, as well as other curators there, the lining to the bodice and to the skirts were machine sewn and the silks were hand sewn. So what I'm going to do to try to replicate that as best as possible. The underskirt is technically one layer. There's no lining to it. I'm going to finish this off how a lining layer would be done. Sew this by machine, but when I get to the flounce that I have to put on, that I will probably hand sew just because the silk is very lightweight and drapey. I don't want to have anything get ruined with it, so all the seams will be machine sewn with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm not going to French seam, I'm just going to do it how they would have done it, which is keep all their seams raw, and I'll pink the edges of the underskirt and leave them as is, as most skirts were done. At least from what I can tell, a lot of skirts were just left raw. There wasn't any felling. Some would have been felled down, but for the most part, the one that I'm referencing does not have felled seams. It was just left raw and pinked. Alright, so here we are. I have the corset on, and I am loving the shape that it gives, even without the sort of bum slash hip pad that goes up. But the movement of it is just really, really nice. So if I sort of try to do a twirl, you can see the movement is really great on it. So I am very pleased with this and how it's coming along. I'm going to start working on the overskirt of the historical dress, as you can tell by all the red fabric laying on my bed. So first things first, I have to sew the tarlatan to the lining layer for the stiffening bit, and I have the tarlatan sitting right over there. So all that will get hand sewn in uh, to each of these pieces, and then this will get machine sewn, and then the silk will be hand sewn. So the way that I'm going to do this, because there won't be a lot of strain on the actual longer part of the seam, I'm just going to use a back stitch from the top to about just under where the hip line starts to curve out and form the rest of the skirt. So probably about right there. So that's what, about a foot, maybe just over a foot.
After stitching down the top of the tarlatan to the lining, I had pad stitched them into place so as not to move around whilst getting the silk and the lining to lay nicely. Pad stitching, for those who might not know, is a simple basting stitch that is taken out after the work has been done. Today it can also be called a tailor's baste or a long whip stitch.
So right now what I'm doing, that I'll be doing for both layers, is I am folding over the seam allowance from the bottom points inward till they just meet up with that edge of the tarlatan. So that way it creates this really nice crisp line like so. And I'll do that on the other, on the satin layer, and then I'll put these two together and I will either slip stitch or I will sort of, it's a type of hem that's done on putting two fabrics together that butt up like this, and it's pretty much just it's a blanket stitch, essentially what we call it today. So it stitches both layers and it creates this nice little ridge effect at the end. Most likely I'll just end up slip stitching it because I don't really want to do that. A lightweight silk satin that's going on to something that's a little bit stiffer. I think I'm just going to do a slip stitch or tunnel stitch, which is where I stitch in this channel just right below the edge, and then I take a little bit on the other side. So if it's folded like this, I'm stitching these two pieces together and the stitches are held. You'll see what I mean. But for now, I'm taking the time to fold everything up, press it, and then keep it pinned in place so that way when I go to do the other one, I can just put them both together and then it'll be a done thing. So onward.
Once the edges were folded over, I went to campus the next day to hand sew the hem. I went in because I needed to have the skirt on the form so I could get the right position of the skirt to have the silk not sag and look askew on the body. It went well, and the waistband was sewn on the following day and finished off with a hook and bar at the back. Thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe and like for more content, and do leave a comment below as this will help with my dissertation analytics. Happy sewing!